Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we built kind of our view, our basic view. We built our sign up and our sign in form. And now in this video, we'll fill it with some life, right? Because we're developing with Laravel, and therefore, well, maybe it's time for us to create some of that backend logic, which we will need for our application. So what I'll do in this video is I will create a user model, set it up in Laravel, and we'll then hook it up to my sign up or my sign in form so that we are actually able to either create a user by signing up or to log in if we already have a user. So let's get started. I'll start by creating my model, and I'll use the command line tool of Laravel for this. So I'll write PHP artisan make model. And I want to name that model user. Now I know that I first have to clean up my installation here, I guess, because Laravel already ships with the user model, and while I could use that and would provide all the functionality I need, I really want to show you how to set up your own user model, and it's real easy to do. So I just deleted the user PHP file here in the app folder, which is the Laravel user model we have. And in the database folder, I'll also get rid of the two PHP files which live in there. So now I can execute my make model command, and I want to make a user model. And I also add the tag -m to also create a migration for that user model right away. Now, what are migrations? What are models in Laravel? Models are basically, as in every MVC framework, the place where your business logic is, where you access your data, where you're able to connect to your data, fetch data, manipulate data. So yeah, it's the data, the core logic of your application, so to say. And migrations are a cool tool Laravel offers to us, where we can very conveniently generate our tables in a database. So all we do is use a migration file created by Laravel, or we create one on our own. And in this file, we basically define a scheme which should be used to create the respective table. So for example, to make it more plastical, I created my user model and told Laravel to also create a migration file by using -m at the end. Now, if I go into that migration file under database migrations, I got this basic setup here, and what this file basically does is it specifies a function which will be run when we migrate all our migration files. So this will create a table in our database. That's all it will do. This up function will create a table in our database, and here inside this function we specify how this table should be structured, which fields it should have, how these fields should be configured, so if they are nullable, and so on. That is what we do in our migration file. And we also got the down function, which basically says if you want to roll back migrations, because that is possible in Laravel, if you want to start fresh or undo things, then what should be done. And normally you just drop the table so that you could recreate it if you migrate again. So this is a convenient way of accessing your database and creating and deleting tables if you need to roll back, without having to write any SQL or without having to go into the database. Even if you might use a graphical interface, it would still be a lot of clicking and doing it by hand, whereas here you just create this table like you would set up a model by accessing certain or adding certain properties, so to say, to an object, and then you just write it into the database. So it's a very handy feature, and one you'll often use when developing with Laravel and a SQL database at least. So this is the migration file for our users table. And I want to have a very simple and plain user model. So all I will do is add a string here. So this will be a varchar field, if you're familiar with SQL. And this string will have the name, or this field will then have the name of just email, because let's say we want to have our users register with an email instead of a username. And I'll copy that and have another string, which will be the password. So string, as I said, will just be a varchar here. And that is almost all I want, a password and an email. There's one more thing I want to add, because otherwise I'll run into some problems with the build and Laravel authentication. I'll add another field which is called remember token. And this is basically a field where Laravel could then store a token if we had like a remember me checkbox. We would store that key in a cookie on the user's computer and also in our database table, so that we could find out if the user closes his browser and then comes back later if he is still logged in. We're probably not going to use that in this application, though it would be very easy to implement, and we should implement this field nonetheless, because otherwise, when we, as I said, when we use the built-in authentication methods, which Laravel has, you get kind of an annoying error if you don't have that remember token field specified. So we'll just do that. Good, so that's everything we need to do. That will set up our database table. And now what do we do in our user model file? This one here in our app folder. At the moment, to be honest, nothing. Because in the background, Laravel will have, as we're using a SQL database, a kind of a strong connection to the database with Eloquent, which is Laravel's ORM. So it's it's really a connection to the database table in the background. So as we set up our table here, we will be able to access all our fields in this table very, very conveniently and intuitively through this user model without specifying anything there. That's kind of the magic done by Laravel as we're using Eloquent, which again is a convenient way to access the tables or the database behind a user model, or where a user model is stored. So for this to work, it's important that we have a certain naming convention. So our class here, our model, is called user, uppercase user, beginning with an uppercase letter, and our table for the user is called users, all lowercases and plural with an S at the end. This way, Laravel will be able to figure out that the users table belongs to the user model. If we were to have, say, users2 as our table name for some reason, then we would have to change something in our user model. Namely, we would have to tell Laravel the table name, because it would look for a users table with an S at the end, and it wouldn't find that table. So then we would have to add our protected property table here, and just give this the name of users2 if that was the name we were choosing. And then again it would work, because now it would know, okay, I'm not looking for users, I'm looking for the table specified in this model here. But won't be necessary since we're using users, and yeah, so everything's working right out of the box. That is a very cool feature of Laravel, in my opinion. That was a lot of talking about the users, but that's really an important thing to understand how to use that, because it is a core feature and you might have a non-SQL database in your backend, then you will have to come up with your own code. But if you're using a MySQL database, then hey, why not use that? So now that we got that, it's time to create our first controller, because we want to be able in our welcome view here, we'll click on a sign up or on the sign in buttons here. And then we want you to fire a certain action, which will check if we can sign in the user, if the sign in button was clicked, or if we can sign up the user if the button in the sign up form was clicked. And we'll handle that logic in a controller. First, let me get rid of this off folder here in the controllers directory. And now I'm going to create a new file, which I will call user controller.php. And yeah, it is a PHP file. It has a namespace of app HTTP controllers. And it is called user controller and will extend the default controller. So that's our user controller. And now what I want to have here is I want to have a post sign up method, so which is executed when we click the submit button in the sign up form, and a post sign in method, which is executed if we click the button in the sign in form. So I'll create those two functions: public function post sign up. Oops. And another function post sign in. Both of those functions will receive a request object because we click on our button and then the request is sent to our server and is handled by Laravel, and we will soon in our routes file hook up our functions, our methods we're writing at the moment, to the responding request from this form. And as these will be post requests, we won't have any get parameters, obviously, but we will have our parameters in the request body. Therefore, we need to access the request. We do this by using Laravel's dependency injection, which is very powerful. And all we have to do for this is to specify the object we want to specify to inject, so the type of the object. In this case, it will be of type request, and it will be living in the Illuminate HTTP namespace. So you want to add this import here, this use import routing to Illuminate HTTP request. And then we'll just give this variable, which will be injected, a name. And then we can use that name or this variable throughout our function. So that's how dependency injection Laravel works. Really, really easy and really cool. You can inject all kinds of objects. Laravel knows about a lot of objects by default, how to inject them. And you can also create custom objects where you will then have to add one line in one file to tell Laravel how to create that object, and then you can inject this custom object too. So that's really powerful thing, and we will see this in later videos. And yeah, I'll just inject the request here too. And now I want to basically create this sign up functionality here. So we will have email in this request, and we can just access it by adding the request function here, and it will be an array where we can just access our email field. Because if we go to our welcome view in our sign up post here form here, we got our email field here, and here this name of this input will be passed in this request array, and we can access this name or this field in this array by just using the name we specify in our view. Very, very easy and intuitive to do. Just recognized I also had a first name, so let me quickly add that to our migration here. So yeah, just another string first name, so that we can add this too. If we got it in the form, we should probably store it somewhere. Good, back in the controller, I'll copy that 3 times. The first name will also be stored in our request, accessible by using this first name key, because this is the name we are using here. And then we'll have our password here, our password, which will be stored in this password variable here. And now what I want to do is I don't want to store the password in its raw format in our database, right? I want to encrypt it in some way. Therefore, I'll use a helper function in Laravel, the bcrypt function. Oops, bcrypt, which will hash my password so that it is safely decrypted in my database. And later, when we try to authenticate the user, we will use a built-in function or helper provided by Laravel, which will automatically match or hash check the hash values of which will automatically check the hash values of the entered password and the password stored in the database so that it is able to find out if the correct password was entered. Now let's finish this user sign up here by creating the user now. And I will do this by just adding a variable called user, which will be a new user, a new instance of our user object here. And be sure to add this import to app user, which is just where our user model lives here, app user. And now we can, as I said, just access the fields in our database table, like properties of this model. So we'll just access user email like a property and set it equal to email. Then I'll access user first name and set it equal to first name. And I will access the password and set it equal to our encrypted password. And all I do then is I run user save, and this will write it to the database. And then let's say I want to return I will just return back for the moment. I will return a redirect back to the view where we came from, so our welcome view back. And that's all I'll do for the moment. Obviously later we will automatically be redirected to like a dashboard or something like this. And this is all now. It won't work at the moment because I haven't set up my database connection. So I'll just do this real quick. And this will be done in our .env file here under these 4 database parameters. Now you will have to obviously configure that the way you need it to be configured on your local development environment or wherever you're working. In my case, I am using Vagrant and a virtual machine. My database will be called Laravel Basics, but you enter whatever name your database has, obviously. And I have this very secure default settings on my local environment. And now we can run our migrate command in the command line by typing php artisan migrate, and this will create a table in our database. And now if we have a look at this is just my SQL program here, application. Now I have these 2 tables in my database. The migrations table just holds information about the migrations which were run, and Laravel will use this if we were to roll back or reset our database. Now the users table is the table we just set up in our PHP file, and as you can see we got this email field, first name, password or remember token, and an ID, and our 2 timestamps. So that is everything we need here. And now let me hook our signup form up to this function here. Therefore, I will go to my routes file under app route http routes, and in here, in this route group here as of Laravel 5.2, I will add a new route post, and this will just be called signup /signup. That will be what it will be displayed in the URL. And I will then pass an array as the second argument. And here in this array, I'll first specify the user's key. Should be the controller we're using, user controller, and then add post signup. This will be the function which will get executed when we hit this request here, the sign up post request. And I'll also give that route a name for me to make it easier to identify and use it throughout my application by just naming it, really sign up. Now back in my welcome view here, I'll take my form, and currently it has no action. And now this action will change because I will use my template expression here by using those double opening and closing curly braces. And here I will use the route command so that in this action, in the real HTML, a link should be filled in leading to our sign up route, because I just gave it a name, and I can just type route sign up, and this will, then when it's rendered to the screen, be turned into a full link, which will be used as the route of this form. Now currently we would get an error because it might look correct here and we got all the fields we need and so on, but what we haven't got is a certain hidden input field we need to add due to Laravel's built-in security features, so to say. Laravel has a built-in protection against cross-site request forgery, which basically means that if someone gets your session key, so to say, he'd be able to log in or to hijack that session, briefly described. So to have some extra protection, with each request we're passing a very specific session key only stored in our current session and not in a cookie or something like this. And this will add some protection against these attacks. Therefore, I'll create an input field of type hidden, and this will have a name of underscore token. This name is important, otherwise Laravel won't be able to identify it. And a value of, again in template expression here, session token. This syntax here, session : token, is not accessing a static method in some session class. Instead, session is a facade, and Laravel uses a lot of that facades. These are basically just shortcuts to other functions, so helper functions, you could say in a way. And we have different objects which have different helper functions, and we can access them through these facades. And a lot of those helper functions or facades are already injected into our views or are usable in our templating engine here, and therefore we can access the session token even though we're nowhere in this file like in any way injecting a session object. And all this does is it fetches the token of our current session and we'll store it in this field here, which will then be also submitted to our in our request. Now we don't have to manually check anything. That is done by Laravel automatically. We just have to add that input field, otherwise you would get an error. Whew. So again, a lot of talking in theory, but I think it's very, very important to get those core concepts right. And now let's see if that works. So I'm in my sign up form here. Now I'll just enter some random email and my first name and then any password and click submit. Now we ran into an error here in our view, even though we specified this hidden input field, because it wasn't actually outputting any data or any token with this command. And that is because in my routes file here, I got this route in this middleware group, but I haven't got my default route. Now it's important that I have both routes in this middleware group, because it is this middleware, the web middleware, newly added in Laravel 5.2, which will, as the description here says, add that CSRF protection. So that's kind of the middleware which is useful, or which should be used if you're doing front-end development, or if you have like a Laravel app which has front-end views and this back-end logic. Where the opposite would be, for example, a simple RESTful service, where all you would do with your Laravel application would be consuming routes coming in from all kind of computers and servers, and therefore no sessions going on, because, as you know, RESTful servers don't have sessions. So here we have a normal application and we have sessions, and therefore we have to use this web middleware for all our routes which are meant to be involved in some kind of sessions going on. And let's try this again, and now this should work. Yeah, don't get an error. Let's look in our database. We got an entry here, and as you can see, our password is hashed. That is not what I entered in this form. So we created our user, And with this user, we're able to now in the next video create our sign-in form and then actually go a step further than just being stuck at our welcome view. But it's very important to get these basics right, to know how to create users, how to access the database, and how to submit forms correctly. So very, very important concepts. Now, one thing we haven't going on in this form is validation. We could pass an empty form here, and we obviously don't want to do this. So that will be something we'll also have a look at in the next video. So see you there. Bye.